It's small crude oil futures time coming here on Monday, May 17th. Be able to trade small crude oil futures. This is one that people have been asking about for as long as we've been around here for the small exchange. Our goal is to smallify all these different markets so that the everyday trader can get in there and access them with the pure exposure and the efficiency of futures, just like the big boys, the institutions, the bankers, and the farmers and everybody else. Now we're bringing a market like crude oil to that everyday trader with the small crude oil futures launching on May 17th. I'm excited about this. Mikey, you, I know, are excited about this, and I know this because we've been in meetings in recent weeks where it's like, oh, like we need to make sure this is okay. We need to make sure this is okay. And I'm like, oh yeah, like it'll be fine. And Mikey's like, no, we need to launch these small crude oil futures. He was getting very amped about it. What say you here on Monday's launch, man?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I've gotten dismissed from a few meetings for just vehemently screaming we need crude oil. Not that drastic, but yeah, long awaited, highly anticipated. I mean, I'm excited to trade it because I want to get long crude oil, but I don't want to be trading CL, which is moving $10 a tick, and I don't want to be stuck in USO, which feels like it's fighting against you. You're swimming upstream there. Finally, a replacement that is, I would say, pretty appropriately sized for most people and still affording that exact exposure to one of the largest asset classes and most volatile in the world.
And this is going to be an especially fun one because the last products that we launched were interest rate products, which, as far as I'm concerned, are some of the sexiest, most fun products to trade. Interest rates pose, honestly, such an interesting trade. But when we launched those products, there was a lot of like, this is the 2-year, this is the 10-year. It's a yield product. So if you think yields are going higher, you buy it. Yields moving higher is risk on. There's steepening, there's flattening, all this different stuff. It is frustrating to have to educate so much on a new product launch. This one is beautiful because it's like, oh yeah, you know, like crude oil, it produces gasoline, jet fuel, all these different energy types, non-renewable energy products there that power a lot of the different industries throughout the country and world. You know that thing? All right, well, here's a small version of it. It's that simple, right?
Yeah, spot on. You think about interest rates, and I always associate it with a more strategic trading approach. You're putting on flatteners and steepeners and considering all this global economic policy. Everyone knows where crude oil is. You know when an OPEC meeting is. You know when EIA numbers are coming out. It's pretty much always moving around. So if stocks are quiet, you can almost count on crude oil to be moving on its own independently, presenting some unique trading opportunities.
So here's the deal. And what's really nice is we can quickly cover the ins and outs of the product and then move on to some interest. I asked Mikey yesterday, I was like, man, what do you want to talk about tomorrow? We're launching crude oil on Monday. What should be the conversation here? And he was like, let's just talk about how we can use it, like the fun ways to trade it. So before we get to that really quickly, this is going to line up with about 100 barrels of oil, US-based oils going into this small US crude oil future here. So if crude yesterday trading around $64 here in the US, that's going to be $6,400 in size. Minimum tick there, a penny, just like the other small products, equates to $1. Estimated margin to start here is going to be around 1,000, should drop down a little bit as this product gets going trading. And that will match a lot of our other products where the margins are anywhere from $60 to a few hundred. This one, the margin is a little bit higher, but way lower than those traditional futures out there that are 10 times the size of this or 5 times the size of this. Here, we really just wanted to go super simple. U.S. crude oil, it's small, and now it's in your grasp to trade in so many different ways, which, just include like you said, Mikey, you want to be long crude oil because you think it's cheap, or you want to sell it because you think that we're going to continue to phase out these fossil fuels and renewable resources. You can have any opinion you want from the everyday trader point of view and look at this 1/10 the size of CL futures, easier access.
Yeah, spot on. And I think when it comes to like scalping opportunities in crude oil too, people are generally looking at oil as the best vehicle to scalp. And of course, it depends on market conditions. Like we saw some great opportunities in the dollar as it, kind of slid lower, nice opportunities to catch a bounce. But generally, intraday, crude is presenting some of the most two-sided action across the board. And whether you think it's a sleeping giant and crude can go back up to 120 or whatever we saw a few years back, or it's going back to the lows of 25, you can take a nice, clean directional approach with this SMO future.
Yeah, with a product that moves around, if crude oil is moving about $1 or $1.50 per day, that's just $100 or $150 these futures here. And I wanted to have a quick conversation about something, and news stories like this pop up, not news stories exactly like this, but news stories on crude pop up every single week. Mikey alluded to OPEC, who are, a group of countries that talk, oil producing countries that talk about whether they're going to freeze production or increase production, shifting around oil prices, or one-off stories like this pipeline hack we saw here in the United States. Just started, I think news broke at the end of last week and wreaked havoc this week. A real quick and easy way with the SMO futures, small crude oil, to trade this news. The news breaks. It looks like they have to shut down this pipeline. And in the short term, gasoline prices skyrocket. Crude oil prices go back to those highs. They got as high as, I think, $67 per barrel. Haven't been there in a while. And then immediately as they, fix this stuff up with that, I believe it was a malware hack, they fix that up and they restart the pipeline. Crude oil dumped yesterday $2.50. And what stinks about the traditional futures is that's, anywhere between $1,000 and $2,500. That's a huge move in a given day when you just wanted to trade the back and forth coming off of this news. Our product would have been $100 to $250. And this is a pretty prime example for opportunity to scalp or just take an opinion on what's going on with something like a pipeline hack or OPEC or what have you.
Yeah, and the neat thing too is that this movement tends to be completely separate from equity market movement. I mean, you're not trading ExxonMobil stock to get oil exposure where you're subject to earnings or any of that upward bias and drift you traditionally see in equities. Crude is so independent and relying on these supply and demand side factors outside of stock news that it's kind of a nice diversification tool as well. So on those inside days in equities, or oftentimes equities and gold will move in similar direction to equities and rates, you have something that's outside that universe presenting its own two-sided action.
Well, that's exactly right. And what was really funny about this is the peak in fear over this pipeline being shut down coincided with the peak in fear over inflation in the equity market. And we saw, I believe it was Wednesday this week, we saw an equity market move lower by more than 2%. And we saw crude oil prices move higher by more than 5%. That is a huge diversified move when you think about the fact that these are both risk on markets. They both, if the economy is functioning well, you expect crude oil prices to move higher and stock prices to move higher. For them to move with such great divergences like that, one poses an interesting opportunity. And we saw in the days following crude come back and stocks actually bounce back to the upside. So an interesting pair trade. But to your point, Mikey, it is really awesome to add another tool here that's like, oh, stocks are doing X, and it barely has any hindrance on the Y that's going on in the energy markets. The same with, we talk about metals and foreign exchange all the time because they're diversified markets that if stocks aren't moving or stocks are moving in one direction, you can get a totally diversified approach in those other markets. So great piece there with the diversification. And you brought this up a little bit. This is also just a nice new market to apply your scalping strategies to, in the same way that we've been trading metals back and forth here. Crude oil has presented a really interesting back and forth between about $58 a barrel and as high as $66 a barrel that we saw just a couple of days ago. It has not been, since we saw those lows of last year, hasn't been really too crazy of a trend trade, just a great back and forth here to trade both sides of.
Yeah, spot on. Definitely a unique time to launch an oil product,
Yeah.
and a great size. I think, $1,000 expected margin. You're going to be able to trade this in accompaniment to your stock exposure and your interest rate exposure, metals exposure. You're not going to be too worried about outsized moves. I remember seeing some CL moves that were 5,000, maybe $10,000 sometimes. Like, difficult to sleep on that. Now you have something that's a little smaller bite, and you can mix it up with some of the other assets in your portfolio.
Yeah, for too long, we have had to use option spreads in traditional futures markets, or these janky ETFs that have a drag to them and they never move like how you want them to move. Now you have a direct line to crude oil in a smaller futures market that doesn't create this like loophole seeking environment where it's like, okay, I want to be short into this pipeline hack rally here, and I have to go sell a 50-cent wide call spread in CL, or I have to sell shares of this USO that is very frustrating to trade. No, you can just go to the smaller futures market, get that direct access, and not have to worry about those $5,000, $10,000 days. Great point, Mikey. We're super excited here for the launch of small crude oil futures. We hope that you are as well, and we hope that you'll be there on day one, May 17th, to start trading the product. We will be happy to take energy traders, stock traders who want to dip their toe. This is going to be an exciting one. So get ready, everybody, for the launch of small U.S. crude oil futures.